Hi, everybody. Welcome to another session of Azure Back to School 2023. My name is Abdul Kazi, and I have my co-host, Gill.
Hello, everybody. How are you?
Good. Good.
It's just about that time to get back to, as we go, at least there's kids going back to school. It's kind of nice to, take this opportunity to take us as adults and, folks that are trying to upskill and get back to school too. So always appreciate this one. It's pretty good timing.
Yeah, no, exactly. And, shout out to Dwayne and other folks who put this out there. So,
Yep.
yeah.
Love it.
So today we are going to be talking about an overview of Microsoft Entra ID. And before we jump into the main sessions, we'll do our quick introductions.
I'm going to try to. There we go.
There we go. So, as I said, my name is Abdul Kazi. I've been in the IT industry for almost 20 years now, very active in the Azure community. Have a bunch of Azure certifications, and Chris and I are part of a meetup. So we run our meetup, Come Cloud with Us. I'm sure you guys have seen it, and we're always looking for more speakers. So if you're interested, come speak. We'll be happy to have you on there. And back to Chris for his introduction.
Yeah, thank you, Abdul. So, hi, I'm Chris Gill. A lot of the similar stuff that Abdul was talking about. Got some industry certifications. Been doing this for about 20 years now. A lot of focus on Azure and hybrid cloud architecture. Got a lot of other fun things going on in my life, but really appreciate my opportunity to kind of bring a lot of my experience to others through the MVP program and through our community efforts with Come Cloud with Us. So again, appreciative of Dwayne and other folks that are kind of putting this on a platform so that others can learn. So with that said, again, if you need to get a hold of us, here's our information. Please reach out. We're always looking for speakers, but we're always looking to help folks too in the community.
And one thing I want to mention is Chris is generous, but he is also a writer. He wrote a book as well. So just to mention, yeah.
Thank you. Thank you.
Amazing, and I feel honored to be partnering with him. So yeah.
No, totally appreciate that. I won't bore everyone with the details, but please, if you're interested, with that, on-premises cloud, that mid-range, AZ801 was the exam. It's an exam guide. It's not really just an exam guide, though. It kind of upskills everybody from the ground up. So yeah, had a lot of fun with it. Please go check it out. I appreciate that call out. So let's get the party started, right?
Yeah, so I guess before we get started, Chris, we were talking about this. So for the folks listening, is it Entra or Entra or what are we saying in these days?
That's amazing, right? So we went from one term, which was Azure, or where do you go? For me, honestly, my organization and others that I've talked to, we're kind of going the entree route and saying Entra, but I have heard others say Entra. So honestly, I don't want to spoil some of the stuff that we have here, but think of it as like your entry door into a bunch of these services and stuff. So again, not spilling any beans, but that's kind of how I'm sticking with it. So Entra for me. Entra for others, I guess, it depends on the day. You're probably going to hear me say it both ways throughout this conversation.
No, makes sense. And obviously, there's no right and wrong, but yeah, that's always interesting the way Microsoft names the products, and you're like, wow, there's always something with the naming. And talking about the naming, it used to be Microsoft Azure AD, which recently was renamed to Entra ID, but the whole premise of this is, giving you a single identity. So you can do single sign-on, you can do one pane of glass, and use one single identity for everything you're using. So another perfect example we can think about is even in our lives. If you talk about our personal lives, you have a bank account, you have personal emails and whatnot, and you're using different username and passwords for that. So now, if you talk about your professional life, when you go to work in a company, you have your email, you're probably accessing some sort of CRM, some sort of HR system, other systems. So there might be a handful of different systems which you have to log into. And think about if you had different username and passwords, that would not only let you go crazy, but the IT department go crazy because they have to reset different uh, applications for a user. Not, and if you company is like has thousands of users, think about that, right? So
Yeah.
this Microsoft Entra ID really streamlines that process. Whereas, as they say, you're choking one throat basically because um, one once a new employee gets onboarded, you're creating one ID, and then based on that, you can give them permission to different SaaS applications, software as a service applications. So using CRM, you're using any third-party applications, or even Microsoft applications. You don't have to create different IDs. The other benefit of that is when the employee moves on, you don't have to go into each separate application. Uh,
Right.
you're basically just disabling the main ID, and then boom, all the access is cut off. So from a security aspect, from a compliancy aspect, that actually works much better because if you talk to your CISO, Chief Information Security Officer, one of the biggest concerns is, hey, how are the IDs going to be safe? Because as we know, that is an easy thing to do these days, right?
Right.
So security has become paramount. So Microsoft actually has done a great job, phenomenal job on bringing everything together. So Chris, I know you work in a legal organization, law firm, right? So I want to kind of get your take on that piece because I know it's a lot of compliances and governance and whatnot. So
Yes. So you probably saw me like face palm, and I started sweating bullets here. But Abdul, what you just said in the past like minute or two kind of explain the past 2, maybe 3 weeks, and even a couple months of my life, at least in my organization, and some of the other folks that I've been talking about in the community or talking with in the community about how things are trending. I'll take, for instance, raise my hand and maybe both hands, and raise the roof a little bit because we just recently got off ADFS, so we're working to get towards SSO. We had, I don't know however many apps it was, and by no means is it an easy thing. Yes, there's great documentation out there, but it all comes back to like, what have you deployed and how have you deployed it and how do how have you documented it, whatever else. But I won't bore you with all those details. I'll just say that a lot of the stuff that you mentioned, this screen in front of us that we're kind of showing you, this is the most simplistic yet deep diagram that I've seen in quite a while, because I think about a bunch of this stuff. You talked about turning accounts on and off and SSO, and a lot of this stuff, and where Microsoft's trending is they realize that a lot of those things take a lot of time. Setting up SSO, yes, it's pretty easy, but if you're a huge organization and you have 5,000 apps, we have legal firm about 500. You have way more apps. There's no way that you're going to get all that done in a very short matter of time. So you're looking at some of this as here I have on-premises applications. How do I give a zero trust architecture to get to those? From what devices, with what users? So we're talking, internal identities, but also that provisioning and deprovisioning out in the cloud for different resources. That's all at play here in this screen. That's all at play with, what Microsoft's trying to help us get to say, yeah, if you're on that path, you're going towards SSO, we want you to get there. Everything, I'm a firm believer, it's like everything should be in that camp. It makes it simplistic for the end users. It kind of corrals those identities. It helps the IT teams kind of monitor and watch those identities to see if there's any kind of, just bad things happening, targeted attacks, any of that stuff. But long story short, there's just so much here that I kind of really enjoy where this is going, because a lot of the stuff, especially for us, was done in-house, custom code, whatever else. And now, maybe we can have those conversations, not as just my organization, but as community, to say, is there a better way? Is there, an easier way, maybe more manageable way to get some of this stuff done? So good question, long-winded answer, but hope you all get something out of that piece of it. So Entra ID, Azure AD on July 11th this year. Microsoft kind of went and did this whole, I don't want to say dog and pony show, but there were a lot of good blogs, announcements, information coming out from Microsoft saying, hey, we realize that a lot of folks still think that Active Directory and Azure AD are the same thing. They're not. They really aren't. There was a lot of confusion. This is kind of meant to help aid some of that confusion. There are a lot of other reasons too. We're going to go through a little bit of that here, but the keys, Microsoft was very targeted with that stuff. Said, a bunch of the things won't change except for the naming. Login URLs, APIs, how you access it. Those are going to stay the same. Developer experiences stay the same. All that tooling, nothing changes there. But we will see this ID, this icon. It's up in the top right-hand corner here. That Entra ID icon starts appearing in things. So Azure Portal, Microsoft Learn, the documentation for both Learn and Tech Community, and especially the Entra Portal. So that's where we kind of see those introductions to change. And then we're going to talk about the why. So this icon, there's a little story behind it. So according to Microsoft, and at least to their documentation, they say that this icon symbolizes a door or an entryway, kind of what we kicked off with, right? More of a portal or a door opening into a world of new possibilities. So I kind of like the change. It's a little refreshing. It's a little play off of what Azure has with the the blues, but again, Entra ID, that separate portal now, that unified portal available at entra.microsoft.com or via ad.cmd.ms. So one of the other things, little tidbit, little plug to Merrill. He's done great work out here with cmd.ms. If you're not familiar, go take a look at that. But all of these portals, it's very quick redirection instead of the aka.ms. Most of the stuff is quickly available. So with that as well, at the bottom, there are a few branding changes to icons. So we'll see Entra ID icons with changes, permissions management, workload ID, private access, internet access, and ID governance all kind of change up the game a little bit. Abdul, any thoughts, any feedback?
Yeah, and Entra ID is such a big piece. There's so many components to it. This is just a introduction or overview. We won't be going deep, and probably Chris and I can talk about each of these items per session, because that's so knee deep that you need multiple sessions on this. But yeah, so it's a great tool. Don't think this is just one feature set, right? Like, it's a masked amount of features underneath the hood, and depending on what you want to do, MFA, conditional access, identity protection, privilege identity management, end user self-service, those are all there. Because think about it, right? Now we live in a world where we want to work from anywhere, any device, any place, any time. So you don't want to really call the help desk. People want to do password resets at their leisure, or so end user self-service provides quite a bit of features there, where you can go and do a lot of things that you don't have to call the service desk anymore.
Right.
And I think Microsoft is moving in the right direction.
Cool. Good feedback. So yeah, as we'd mentioned, that unification, and we will hop into just a brief demo here shortly, but some of this unification ends inside of that Entra admin, well, it begins inside Entra admin center. So where you'll see typically, from an identity management perspective, if you were in the Azure portal, managing users, groups, MFA, all the great things that you mentioned, Abdul, now in identity under Entra Admin Center. Same with protection. So if you're thinking, like identity protection for user accounts, that's all stored underneath there. Some of the new governance things, whether it's access reviews and some of those features that we'll talk about here shortly, all under the identity governance piece. Verifiable credentials, kind of I don't want to say it's a new topic, but it's starting to gather some steam. I've definitely seen on LinkedIn where you can kind of set this up for your organization. So instead of saying a government issued ID, you could actually take this a step further, going into your Azure tenant, setting up the verifiable credentials with LinkedIn, basically stating, yes, I'm, company X, I'm tied up with, or tied to LinkedIn for these identities. And then your employees can also go out and say, yes, I am, trustworthy employee of this company. I can verify credentials through this process. So one step, but there's, so many other uses for that too. So kind of interesting. Permissions management. I always think of this as the Knox components. So, any of the like cloud access security broker, some of the other bits and pieces where technically I could reach out and say, you mentioned earlier AWS, Google Cloud. I could take some of those things and say, I want to consistently manage permissions across all of my cloud infrastructure available there. And then this new topic, global secure access, which we'll talk about just a hair, but some ability to have both internet access. So they call it Microsoft Entra Internet Access, a little bit of a secure web gateway. And then on top of that, a private access approach. So let's jump into some of the generally available features. And I say some because, again, we would probably be here for the next week, 2, maybe 3 weeks, talking about all the features available. Sorry, Abdul, maybe you agree with me. I picked some of my favorites on this one, so I hope you don't mind. But honestly, I think of stuff like what's the big money thing, right? I can tell you it's not a week that goes by for our organization where somebody calls or somebody IMs me or somebody sends me a note and says, how do I know that this is from our company? How do I know this is from company X, Y, or Z? So Microsoft realizes that first bullet here, that enhanced company branding for sign-in experiences. That just went generally available probably a week or 2 ago, maybe a little bit longer, but it's giving some more expanse to that void where, it's not just a background or a sign-in button with your company logo on the top. There's some other stuff that you can kind of do with it. So very welcome, at least for me. Take some calls off my desk. I appreciate that. Hopefully others will too. Entra ID governance. So we talked a lot about, what's coming, or at least what's underneath this whole access review piece. Microsoft's using the power of machine learning to kind of guide some of this stuff. So yes, it wouldn't be right if I didn't mention that there are additional requirements. There's a step up for that licensing. So you need the Microsoft Entra ID governance step up for Microsoft Entra ID P2 license, alphabet soup, but that's roughly it's a list of, I think, $7 USD. But, again, it's a step up that you would need at least for some of these bits and pieces. You don't need that for everybody in your organization, but if you're looking to do some of these types of whether user or, group access reviews and activity reviews, definitely a welcome sign, and some of those features that are soon to be coming is a good thing.
Just to add on there, so
Yeah.
on the governance ID, and the good thing about it is, as we've kind of talked about, since this is more of a single sign-on, so you can tie your Entra ID governance into a third party or third party cloud, so AWS, GCP, or you can do SaaS applications. So if you don't want to do Salesforce or Box or whatnot, you can do it. Even other cloud HR systems, you can tie that ID. And from a governance standpoint, because every company is different. So like Chris works in a law firm. I had customers in healthcare or financial. They have different compliance requirements. They're heavily regulated industries. So IT governance is absolutely paramount to them. So they want to make sure that whatever data anybody is touching, that actually is authorized, and they kind of track what was touched and why are they even touching that. So Entra ID does governance does a phenomenal job of that.
Awesome, great plug. The new stuff. I say new. I know we can't see all you folks, but I'm going to ask the question anyways. How many folks have put your hand up? How many folks have at least looked at the application proxy pieces of Azure AD? This is a little bit of a change to that. So app proxy, for folks who know or don't know, there were components where you could actually go and publish something that was on premises. It's almost like a reverse proxy, but you had to play a lot of games with potentially changing how authentication works and thinking about that. The idea of this, Microsoft Entra, Internet Access, Secure Web Gateway, and even to the level of the private access, which is this zero trust network architecture. Basically, Microsoft has realized that that was kind of preventative for a lot of folks. They didn't really want to go through all that work to kind of change how authentication methods are done. So they're kind of meeting in the middle. These, again, their preview, they are available with their preview settings. Encourage you to go take a look at some of that stuff, because as I look at this, it's how do I kind of protect the devices that are going out to different things. So if it's a mobile device, a laptop, again, that zero trust model, where am I kind of meeting the devices going out to an internet or an edge service? And then that private access, where are those devices coming into something that might be, published from an on-premises or private cloud environment. So lifecycle workflows, kind of a cool thing. This is where I at least want to pull some eyes towards in a demo. I won't go through it all, but just at least show kind of where that's at. And where it's kind of going. But again, you talked about earlier, Abdul, with that provisioning, deprovisioning. A lot of this stuff is legitimately like, here's a profile, it's a click and go. I'll show you that here in a bit, but it's pretty nice to kind of, say, I have new users that are coming into the organization, or I have users that are leaving. How do I handle that? How do I build a workflow behind it? So, and then the Entra ID governance entitlement management. Again, just another kind of a step up on top of, how devices are managed, comings and goings of those inside of the organization, inside of your tenants. Do any other comments, thoughts here?
I think you covered it all, and that probably is going to come in later slides.
All right. Now we're going to talk a little bit about some of the preview features. So again, we had, at least in conditional access policies in CAE, continuous access evaluation, some limited, at least warnings and, sign-in risks and whatnot, based on where you're at, where you're accessing data. Now we have, at least in a preview, this now strict enforcement of those location policies. So think of it as I was working on something inside of, the organization just an hour or two ago, and now I went to, a public pick your coffee shop, and we saw that there's been bad activity from that coffee shop. I can now go and say continuous access evaluation that no, that location cannot be used. It's almost real time, so kind of a nice feature that we're finally getting there. The Entra ID, real time threat intelligence and advanced detection. There's a lot to this piece. I will say, super happy to see this kind of tie in with Defender for cloud. So Defender for identity, Defender for cloud. Those signals now, at least once this leaves preview, will be more conjoined inside of the Defender environment. So folks that are using Defender out there, I'm sure it's like bottles of champagne have popped open. Red carpets are rolled out. People are excited and happy about that. If not, well, that's fine. It could be other things, but guest account governance. So one of the big things I know you mentioned, for legal, it's like we do have a lot of external IDs. We do invite a lot of folks, a lot of guests into our environment. How do I manage those? How do I keep track of them? How do I know folks are using? For a while, and I think honestly we may still be at that point, but for a while it was if you sign in every couple months, maybe every 1 month, you attest to a EULA, that end user licensing agreement, then I know that you're there. But I want to do a little bit more. Maybe I want to take that and say, well, if you haven't responded to the EULA and I see that you're an inactive guest and you haven't done this for a certain amount of time, rip, remove, replace, kind of get it out of the environment. So again, it's like we can only trust so much, especially with the guest accounts, and that's even more important when we start to get to multi-tenant stuff, which is down below. But platform SSO for Mac OS. Abdul, I kind of put this in there for you. I know we always talk about the Mac users and how they don't get a whole heck of a lot of love. It's a Microsoft world. It's at times, and then Mac is like a second in command there. But happy to see that. Happy to really see kind of this preview feature, allowing that SSO to reach now out to Mac devices as well. So nice
that's really phenomenal to manage the Mac OS and the feature sets and stuff. Because to your point, Chris, in one of my previous employers, I was using a Mac on a day-to-day basis, and the difference was huge. Because from the Office 365 applications compared to Windows and Mac, it's different. So yeah, the feature set is different. So this is huge to manage the devices and whatnot. Now it's going to be all one pane of glass. So regardless, if it's Windows or Mac, then you can provision them, you can manage them, you can do whatnot. So it makes life easier from an operation standpoint.
Yeah. No, I agree, and I can't wait to see. I can see what's being built there, but I know there's going to be more. So I can't wait to see how that gets expanded. Multi-tenant organization. I briefly mentioned it. I think I would say this is a huge change. It's not one of those overnight things where folks they've been managing different tenants, different B2B tenants, whatever else. But I think for a lot of places that are going through mergers, acquisitions, any of this stuff, for growth, we'll just say growth in general. I think this multi-tenant organization is going to be huge. I think that'll help a lot of folks, especially with the guest stuff that we just talked about too. So now I can kind of manage that across multiple different tenants. So I see you nodding your head, Abdul.
Yeah, I know, and I already see amazing use cases because in my example, working for Microsoft partners, we have multiple tenants, and then we have our own tenant. Then we log into the customer tenant for some environment, and the customer working with the enterprise customer. So I was working with one enterprise customer. They had 3 different tenants altogether. So think about it: one for production, one for test, and then the third one was because they had a specific use case that they wanted to use. So just having those 3 tenants in a multi-tenanted environment would make life so much easier.
Yeah. And I'm thinking too, even going, what you mentioned, thinking about deeper with policy and, blueprints and other things of that nature too, permissions management. It just gets a little bit more easy with that. So, but yeah, check it out. Check that link. Go read about it all. There's so much there. But yeah, so with that, let's try and go through just a little bit of a demo. And again, before I do this, I mentioned Entra ID, at least Microsoft Entra and Entra ID, that environment, entra.microsoft.com or ad.cmd.ms will both get you there. So here we are in the Entra Admin Center, and I want to minimize just a few of these things to kind of show you again on this left pane, this left blade where I have a home page that kind of shows me just an overview of all the stuff that's available. Favorites, I can go through each one of these things as I more frequently use them. I could add to my favorites. But as we go through identity, again, this looks similar to Azure AD. Or have the ability to manage users and groups, my devices and applications. If I do show more, I go and see the rest of all the settings and available features here, managing roles and admins, my billing. But then I also have, the rich protection pieces, the identity governance, our external identities, any of the hybrid management and monitoring. So again, if you're familiar with Azure and the Azure portal and Azure AD, this will look very, very familiar to you. Same settings have been ported here. What I like, though, is, again, this protection where, I've kind of gone through, I struggle at times to figure out, like, where is privileged identity management and how do I get to conditional access? And, I need to click on security and I need to go here and there. If I wanted to go to conditional access, I'm now under just protection. I can go into conditional access and take a look at my, policies or take a look at any of the reports or anything that's here. So a little bit smoother, a little more efficient in my perspective. Identity governance, same deal. Some of those features we talked about for entitlement management, access reviews, and privilege identity management all here as well. I'll pause for 1 second. Abdul, any questions or any thoughts on some of the stuff I just kind of breezed through?
So I guess the questions that people would have is, okay, what kind of licensing do we need, right? Because licensing becomes complicated. I know you kind of talked about the Entra ID premium licenses P1, P2. So that would actually give you quite a bit of things. But the other question is, are there built-in policies that people can use right off the bat?
Yeah, policies in regards to which part?
Protection or identity governances.
Oh, yeah. So if we were going into like identity protection itself, yes. I mean, you have some of the basic like user risk policies, sign-in risk policies, if that's what we're talking about.
Exactly.
Yes. So from this perspective, a lot of time has been spent by Microsoft at least going through and they see this traffic coming in. I don't want to say that they see everything that's coming in, but they see the traffic, they see the patterns. They're best equipped to kind of go through this stuff. With that said, they kind of have built a bunch of these user risk and access policies and controls based off of that data. So where you see different targeted attacks, different information or whatever, could kind of bleed back into these user risk policies and these sign-in risk policies. So again, where we say, like a sign-in risk, high, medium, and above, and low and above, there's all kind of different rules and different pieces that kind of help outline those as to what's really what's really a risk. Like, for example, I always use a favorite, just a travel warning, right? So I know there's this like infrequent travel or unexpected travel thing where it's like, all right, I'm here working in upstate New York, and then somebody signs in as me in Hong Kong 5 minutes from now. Pretty sure that's not possible yet. I mean, I know I've got the DeLorean Lego here somewhere around, but I'm pretty sure that's not possible yet. So that's something that's kind of flagged and bubbled up. So signal, it's a security signal we can act on, but that's built into some of these policies. So that said, a couple of these can also be adjusted and overridden. So depending on what you're seeing in your environment, you can go through and build out some of those pieces. So good question. All right. I did mention the access reviews, and I just want to show folks at least where we're seeing this one preview piece. So if I were to build a new access review, and I know you mentioned about I'm sorry, I'm going to flip back 1 second for licensing. Yes, it would be remiss if I didn't mention again, we're all familiar with, Azure AD, P1, P2 licensing, where those features kind of fall. There's another, I call them plus licenses. They're not going to be, documented as plus licenses, but they're premium license. So there's another, that step up to like an identity governance or whatever else. There are some bits and pieces of some of the stuff that we are showing that will require that. So, so if I went in and just said maybe a teams and groups, I'm going to go quick, but I want to say, all Microsoft 365 groups with guest users. I have this inactive button now, which is nice. I also have I'm just going to go and say pick owner, maybe a quarterly review. And I should also have this feature. So I wanted to call, and I know I went quick, but I want to call this out. This user to group affiliation. Just really, it's new. It's really nice when you think about it. It's basically, do any of the folks in this group, are they working together on these same resources, these same things? So it's a little bit deeper than, am I just in a group? Am I just a member? It's like, are you actually doing similar workloads within that? It's kind of an interesting thing. I'm curious to see where that goes, but new preview feature for anybody who wants to dig into that more. This is how you get to it. All right. I'm going to skip on to this. We said verifiable credentials. This tenant, I don't have any set up. I'd love to kind of go through that. It's maybe an opportunity for a session in the future. Permissions management, same deal. But I do want to kind of jump into just this global secure access preview for a second too. There's a lot here. If you are interested in kind of looking into this, highly recommend the Get Started. I know it sounds a little funny, but that Get Started page, for everyone else who hasn't gone through this yet, it will have 2 or 3 different steps that you need to go through. To make sure that you have licensing that's appropriate, like Abdul had asked earlier. It will make sure that your tenant's kind of set up to do these bits and pieces, and then it will hop you into this page. Where you can kind of get started. But again, these 2 features, relatively new. Again, a little bit on the, the preview side, but they give you that rich ability to say, from that device going out to an endpoint to the internet, it's wrapping a little bit of protection around those credentials, around your tokens. On the flip side, with the Entra private access, a little bit more of an approach to say, how are those devices reaching something back to the organization? So whether it's VPN, micro VPN, some type of access back to that corporate network. So any other thoughts, Abdul? Questions?
No, there's so much to unpack here to your point, right? Yeah, we can probably go hours and hours in here, but this is a great starting point for a lot of folks who do not know. The best thing I would say, just go to the portal, take a look at this, and start playing with it. That's the best way of learning it. And
And
the
then you
funny thing,
can teach us how to do it because we're also learning.
why not, right? And the funny thing is, this the keeps. If I can speak, this thing keeps changing though. One of the funny things I've noticed is when I used to buy, and I still buy physical books, but when I used to buy physical books, sometimes when I used to get them a couple of years ago, when I started going through them, the portal would look very different than the screenshots in the books because
Yeah.
Microsoft refreshed the UI of the portal. Um, so that's one of the challenges, just keeping up because this changes so often, and you're like, okay, so many features, we're not even quarter of the features, and then we have new features coming up now.
Yeah. So that's a great segue. So thank you, Abdul, because what better than to talk about how to keep up with all this stuff? So, yes, hit it right on the nose. AAD blog for the time being, still aka.ms/AAD blog. I expect that to change at some point. Microsoft Learn again with this, Azure Active Directory and their new name information. This URL gives you pretty much everything that we went through and more. It goes you at least a little bit more in depth on some of the other bits and pieces. Highly recommend this second bullet too, because it does tell you the name convention. So it's not necessarily that it went just from Azure AD to Microsoft Entra ID, whatever. They do ask you, things like, hey, if you're using a naming convention and you used to call it AAD, please make sure that it's ME, capital ME dash ID. So there are some recommendations that Microsoft is utilizing, some best practices. Please go check those out. I love what's being done at Entra.news. That was something that came out 6 or 8 weeks ago. Identity team's doing a great job there. If you haven't seen it yet, go hit it, go subscribe. Gives a lot of great information of what's currently going on, blog articles, other folks like, Abdul and I that might be writing about this stuff, but it also kind of pitches a little bit of that picture into the future as well. So what's coming, what's maybe, in preview, some of the other things to take a look at. As we said, it's moving so fast, but that's a nice little roll up, little readable newsletter that, you get once a week. Great resource you can go take a look at. In tandem, the Microsoft.com security blog also covers a lot of the stuff. It's a little more security focused. So for those people who are, maybe working with SOCs or whatever else, how it's integrating with SIEM and, and some of these other bits and pieces for Microsoft Sentinel. There's a lot of information there too. So scope to that. Abdul, any other resources that I might be missing?
No, I think these are great resources. Yeah.
Awesome. All right. So, parting words. Seriously, we just want to thank you for tuning in. We want to thank the community and the organizers of Azure Back to School. You guys rock. Keep up this great work. Wouldn't be here unless you guys were helping to kind of raise awareness and bring this type of resource to everybody. So thank you for that. Abdul, thank you for spending time with me and, doing this hustle on the side.
Always a pleasure, Chris. Thanks for doing this. Yeah. And hopefully you enjoyed this session. Hopefully this was useful to you, and feel free to come back to us with any questions or feedback and whatnot. We have our Twitter handle, so me and Chris are both on Twitter, very active. So yeah, reach out to us with any questions.
Awesome. All right. Thank you all and take care. Till next time.
Thanks so much.